The whistle of the train pierced the crisp autumn air as it pulled into Snowflake, Arizona, its iron wheels screeching against the tracks until it finally shuddered to a halt. Bethany Hayes pressed her face against the window, her heart hammering wildly in her chest as she gazed at the small frontier town that was to be her new home. Behind her, passengers began gathering their belongings, eager to disembark, but Bethany remained frozen in her seat, clutching her small valise as if it were a shield. Samuel Garrett had been waiting at the station since dawn, his weather-beaten hat in his hands, nervousness evident in his usually steady demeanor. He'd exchanged letters with Bethany for nearly 6 months before sending her the train fare from Boston. But standing there on the wooden platform of Snowflake's modest station in October of 1885, he wondered if he'd been a fool to think a city woman would actually come to this dusty corner of the Arizona territory to marry a cattle rancher she'd never met. The train conductor passed through the car, tipping his hat to Bethany. "Madam, this is Snowflake. Your stop, if I recall correctly." Bethany nodded but didn't move. "Yes," she whispered, "but I need a moment." The conductor glanced at the nearly empty car. "Take your time, madam, but we'll be continuing to Holbrook in 20 minutes. As the last passengers filed out, Bethany remained seated, her blue eyes wide with uncertainty. Through the window, she could see a tall man with broad shoulders standing apart from the dwindling crowd, looking expectantly at each passenger who descended from the train. That must be him, Samuel Garrett, the man whose letters had been her lifeline during the darkest time of her life. Samuel shifted his weight from one foot to the other, watching as the platform gradually emptied. A feeling of disappointment began to settle in his chest. Perhaps she had changed her mind. Perhaps she had never boarded the train at all. He couldn't blame her if she had. What did Snowflake have to offer a Boston lady inside the train? Bethany's hands trembled as she opened her reticule and withdrew the last letter he had sent her. His handwriting was strong and sure, unlike the delicate script she had been taught at finishing school. "I cannot promise you luxury," he had written, "but I can promise you respect, honesty, and a home where you will never want for anything essential to happiness." It had been those words that convinced her to leave behind the ruins of her former life in Boston, the scandal of her father's bankruptcy, his subsequent suicide, and the cold shoulders of those who had once called themselves friends. But now, faced with the reality of stepping into a new world, terror gripped her heart. The conductor appeared again. "Madam, we'll be departing soon." "I know," Bethany said softly. I need a moment more." Outside, Samuel had begun to turn away when the station master called out to him. "Mr. Garrett, hold up there." Samuel paused, turning back reluctantly. "The conductor says there's still a lady on board. Seems she might be your mail-order bride, but she's not coming out." Samuel's heart leapt, then immediately sank. "She's afraid," he said, more to himself than to the station master. "Well, train's set to leave in 15 minutes. You'd best do something if you don't want her going on to Holbrook." Samuel nodded, his mind racing. He approached the train car slowly, removing his hat as he climbed the steps. The conductor nodded at him as he entered, gesturing toward the back of the car where a solitary figure sat, her face turned toward the window. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "Miss Hayes," he called softly. Bethany turned, and Samuel felt his breath catch. Her photograph hadn't done her justice. Her eyes were the blue of a summer sky, though now they were wide with apprehension. Her chestnut hair was neatly arranged beneath a modest traveling hat, and despite the weariness of days of travel, her complexion was fair and smooth. "Mr. Garrett?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He nodded, maintaining a respectful distance. "Yes, madam, I'm Samuel Garrett." She looked down at her hand, still clutching his letter. I'm sorry. I thought I could do this, but now. Samuel glanced at the conductor, who tapped his pocket watch meaningfully. Turning back to Bethany, he made a decision that would change both their lives. "The train's leaving soon, Miss Hayes," he said gently, "but I want you to know something. I promised in my letters that you would have choices here, and I meant it." He moved a bit closer, then carefully sat down in the seat across the aisle from her. "I'll wait," he said simply. "Whether that means waiting until you're ready to step off this train today, or waiting until the next train comes through if you need to go on to Holbrook to think things over, I'll wait." Bethany looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "You would do that?" Samuel nodded. "I would. I understand how frightening this must be for you. Coming all this way to marry a man you've never met, in a place you've never been." He gestured to the window. "Snowflake isn't Boston, that's for certain, but it's a good place with good people." The conductor cleared his throat loudly from the front of the car. Samuel continued, his voice gentle but earnest. "Miss Hayes, I won't force you to choose right now. But I want you to know if you do choose to stay, you'll be welcome. And if you need time, I'll understand that too." Bethany studied his face, the earnest green eyes, the strong jaw softened by the kind expression he wore. He was handsome, certainly, but it was the patience in his eyes that touched something within her. "What if?" She began hesitantly. "What if I stay in town but not at your home?" "Until I'm sure." Relief washed over Samuel's features. "The boarding house in town is owned by Mrs. Wilson, a fine woman. You could stay there as long as you need." Bethany took a deep breath. "And you truly wouldn't mind waiting?" Samuel smiled, the gesture transforming his weather-beaten face. "Miss Hayes, I've been waiting for you longer than just today." The conductor approached them. "Final call for Snowflake. We're pulling out in 2 minutes." Samuel stood, offering his hand. "The choice is yours, Miss Hayes, but I hope you'll give Snowflake and me a chance." Bethany looked at his extended hand, then back at his face. Something in his steady gaze calmed the panic that had gripped her. Slowly, she reached out and placed her gloved hand in his. "I'll stay," she said quietly. "For now." The relief on Samuel's face was unmistakable as he helped her gather her belongings. When they stepped onto the platform together, Bethany took her first real breath of Arizona air, crisp with the promise of autumn and fragrant with sage. The town of Snowflake spread before her, modest but neat, with mountains rising in the distance. "It's beautiful," she said, surprise coloring her voice. Samuel smiled. "Wait until you see it at sunset," he said. "The mountains turn a shade of purple I've never seen anywhere else." As the train whistle blew and the engine began to chug away from the station, Bethany felt a curious mixture of terror and hope. She had stepped off the train, but her journey was only beginning. Samuel carried her trunk with ease, leading her toward a wagon at the edge of the station. "I'll take you to Mrs. Wilson's first," he said. "She's expecting you." "She is?" Bethany asked, surprised. Samuel's ears reddened slightly. "I might have told the whole town about my Boston bride," he admitted. "Folks have been preparing for your arrival for weeks." "Oh," Bethany said, a flush spreading across her cheeks. "I hope I don't disappoint them." Samuel helped her into the wagon, his touch gentle but secure. "Miss Hayes, the only disappointment today would have been if that train had pulled away with you still on it." As the wagon made its way down Snowflake's main street, Bethany observed the town with curious eyes. It was nothing like Boston, with its grand buildings and bustling streets, but there was something appealing about the frontier settlement. The general store, the small church, the schoolhouse, they spoke of a community that was building something lasting. Samuel pointed out various landmarks as they passed. "That's Dr. Mitchell's office. Fine doctor, trained back east." And there's the mercantile Mr. Porter carries just about anything you might need. It's smaller than I imagined, Bethany admitted. Samuel nodded. It is small, but it's growing. The railroad coming through has made a big difference. He hesitated, then added, My ranch is about 3 miles outside town. Good land with a creek running through it. Bethany tensed slightly at the mention of the ranch, and Samuel noticed. But you'll have plenty of time to see it later if you choose to, he added quickly. They arrived at a neat 2-story house with a wide porch and window boxes still showing the last blooms of summer. A plump woman with silver-streaked hair was sweeping the porch, but she set her broom aside as the wagon approached. Mrs. Wilson, Samuel called, jumping down from the wagon and going around to help Bethany descend. May I present Miss Bethany Hayes? The older woman beamed, coming forward with outstretched hands. My dear, welcome to Snowflake. We've been so eager to meet you. Bethany took the woman's hands, warmed by the genuine welcome in her voice. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. I appreciate your willingness to take me in on such short notice. Mrs. Wilson waved away her thanks. Nonsense. I've had your room ready for days. Samuel here was quite insistent that you have the best room in the house, the one with the bay window overlooking the garden. Bethany glanced at Samuel, touched by his thoughtfulness. Well, come in, Mrs. Wilson continued. You must be exhausted from your journey. I've got fresh lemonade and some sandwiches waiting, and then you can rest before supper. As Samuel brought in her trunk, Bethany followed Mrs. Wilson into a comfortably furnished parlor. The house was simple but spotlessly clean, with braided rugs on the floors and curtains that fluttered in the breeze from open windows. This is lovely, Bethany said, meaning it. Mrs. Wilson smiled proudly. It's not fancy, but we manage. Now, sit down and have something to drink while Samuel brings your things up. When Samuel returned from carrying the trunk upstairs, he hesitated in the parlor doorway, hat in hand. Will there be anything else you need, Miss Hayes? He asked. Bethany looked up at him, suddenly unsure. This man had exchanged months of letters with her, had sent money for her passage, had waited patiently at the station, and now was prepared to wait even longer for her to make up her mind about their arrangement. The decency of it moved her. Mr. Garrett, she said, I want to thank you for your understanding today. He shook his head. There's nothing to thank me for. There is, she insisted. Many men would not have been so patient. A small smile touched his lips. I'm not many men, Miss Hayes. Mrs. Wilson looked between them with approval. Samuel, you'll join us for supper tonight, won't you? 6 o'clock sharp. Samuel glanced at Bethany, seemingly checking if this would be acceptable to her. When she gave a small nod, he smiled. I'd be honored, Mrs. Wilson, thank you. After he left, Mrs. Wilson showed Bethany to her room, a charming space with a comfortable-looking bed, a small writing desk, and, as promised, a bay window overlooking a garden where late-blooming flowers still added splashes of color. Rest now, dear, Mrs. Wilson said kindly. You've had quite a day. Left alone, Bethany sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day washing over her. She had nearly continued on that train, nearly let fear make her decision. But something about Samuel Garrett, the steadiness in his eyes, the patience in his voice, had given her the courage to step onto the platform. She unpacked a few necessities, then moved to the window, gazing out at the town of Snowflake. It was nothing like Boston, but perhaps that was for the best. Boston held too many painful memories now, her father's disgrace, the whispers behind fans at social gatherings, the sudden evaporation of marriage prospects once her family's fortune was gone. The letters from Samuel had come at her darkest moment, responding to her discreet advertisement in a newspaper that catered to such arrangements. His first letter had been formal but kind, describing his ranch, his life in Arizona Territory, and his desire for a wife who would be a true partner. Subsequent letters had revealed a man of intelligence, decency, and quiet humor, a man who loved books as she did, who took pride in his work, and who seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings. Still, it was one thing to exchange letters with a stranger across the continent and quite another to actually marry him. Bethany sighed, turning from the window. She would give herself time to know the man beyond his letters, time to see if Snowflake could truly become home. She lay down on the bed, intending only to rest her eyes, but exhaustion claimed her and she fell into a deep sleep. When she awoke, the light in the room had changed, taking on the golden quality of late afternoon. A soft knock at the door roused her further. "Miss Hayes," came Mrs. Wilson's voice. "Supper will be ready in half an hour." "Thank you," Bethany called, sitting up quickly. "I'll be down shortly." She washed her face in the basin, changed into a fresh dress, one of the few she had brought that wasn't severely wrinkled from travel, and arranged her hair as best she could. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a woman she barely recognized, travel-worn, certainly, but with a spark in her eyes that had been missing for months. When she descended the stairs, she found the parlor occupied by Mrs. Wilson, Samuel, and an elderly gentleman who was introduced as Judge Wilson, Mrs. Wilson's husband. Samuel stood immediately upon her entrance, and Bethany couldn't help but notice how he had transformed himself since their meeting at the station. His clothes, while still simple, were clean and pressed, his hair neatly combed, and the subtle scent of bay rum aftershave reached her as he approached. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice warm. "I hope you were able to rest." "I was, thank you," she replied, suddenly shy under his gaze. Mrs. Wilson bustled them into the dining room, where a hearty meal awaited: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables that Mrs. Wilson proudly announced had come from her own garden. The conversation flowed more easily than Bethany had expected, with Judge Wilson regaling them with tales of early territorial days, and Mrs. Wilson asking considerate questions about Bethany's journey. Samuel spoke little, but Bethany often felt his gaze on her. When she met his eyes, there was always that same patient warmth there, never pressuring, simply appreciating her presence. As they enjoyed Mrs. Wilson's apple pie for dessert, Samuel finally directed a question to Bethany. "I was wondering, Miss Hayes, if you might allow me to show you around Snowflake tomorrow, just the town," he added quickly, "so you can get your bearings." Bethany considered his offer. It seemed a reasonable next step. "I would like that, Mr. Garrett." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Excellent. Shall I call for you at 10? That would give you time to have a leisurely breakfast and rest a bit more." 10 would be perfect, she agreed. After dinner, Samuel took his leave, promising to return the next morning. As he donned his hat at the door, he paused. "Miss Hayes, I want you to know something. Whatever you decide about Snowflake, about us, I count myself fortunate just to have met you in person." The sincerity in his voice touched Bethany deeply. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett, for everything." After he left, Mrs. Wilson helped Bethany unpack the rest of her things, chattering companionably as they worked. "Samuel Garrett is one of the finest men in this territory," Mrs. Wilson said as she hung a dress in the wardrobe. "When his parents died of influenza 5 years ago, he took over that ranch and made it prosper, all while raising his younger brother until the boy went east to university last year." Bethany absorbed this new information, adding it to what she knew of Samuel from his letters. "He mentioned his brother," she said. "Stephen, isn't it?" Mrs. Wilson nodded approvingly. "That's right. Bright boy, studying to be an engineer in Pennsylvania." She paused, folding a shawl. "Samuel could have had his pick of local girls, you know." But he always said he was waiting for someone special. Bethany felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not sure I'm special, Mrs. Wilson." The older woman gave her a shrewd look. "You must be, for him to wait as he has. And not just for you to arrive on that train, mind you, but to be willing to wait now, even after you're here." That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of a frontier town settling into darkness so different from the constant hum of Boston, Bethany reflected on Mrs. Wilson's words. There was something compelling about Samuel Garrett, something that went beyond his handsome face and strong shoulders. It was his patience, his consideration, the sense that he saw her as a person of value rather than a convenient solution to his need for a wife. She had agreed to marry him based on letters alone, desperate to escape Boston and start anew. Now, having met him, she felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't expected, not just gratitude for his understanding, but a genuine interest in the man himself. Morning brought clear skies and a crispness to the air that hinted at the approaching winter. Bethany dressed carefully in a blue dress that matched her eyes, arranging her hair in a style that was modest but becoming. When Mrs. Wilson commented on her appearance at breakfast, Bethany blushed, unwilling to admit even to herself that she had chosen the dress because Samuel had once mentioned in a letter that blue was his favorite color. Promptly at 10, there was a knock at the door. Samuel stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking both eager and nervous. "Good morning, Miss Hayes," he said. "I brought the buggy today, thought it might be more comfortable for seeing the town than the wagon." The buggy was indeed more comfortable, with a padded seat and a small canopy to provide shade. As they set off down the main street, Samuel pointed out buildings of interest: the small newspaper office, the telegraph station, the dressmaker's shop. "Mrs. Winters at the dress shop is quite talented," he said. "Not that there's anything wrong with your clothes," he added hastily, "but if you need anything made for our climate, she's very skilled." "I appreciate knowing that," Bethany said. "I suspect my Boston wardrobe may not be entirely suitable here." They continued their tour, stopping at the general store where Samuel introduced her to Mr. Porter, a jovial man with an impressive mustache who insisted she take a peppermint stick as a welcome to Snowflake. Outside the store, they encountered a woman with 2 young children, whom Samuel introduced as Mrs. Thomas and her twins, Emily and Elijah. "You must be Samuel's bride," Mrs. Thomas exclaimed, her face alight with curiosity. "We've heard so much about you." Bethany smiled, though she felt a twinge of discomfort at being referred to as Samuel's bride, when their arrangement was still uncertain in her mind. Samuel seemed to sense her unease. "Miss Hayes is staying at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house for now while she gets acquainted with Snowflake," he explained smoothly. Mrs. Thomas looked momentarily confused but recovered quickly. "Well, of course, moving to a new town is a big adjustment. You're wise to take your time." As they continued their tour, Bethany was struck by how everyone they met seemed to know and respect Samuel. From the blacksmith to the schoolteacher, each greeted him with genuine warmth and treated Bethany with interested courtesy. "People seem to think highly of you," she observed as they stopped the buggy on a small rise overlooking the town. Samuel's ears reddened slightly. "I try to be fair in my dealings," he said simply. "And I've been here since I was a boy, so folks have had time to take my measure." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, gazing at the view. The town of Snowflake spread below them with the mountains beyond, their slopes covered with ponderosa pines. "It's truly beautiful here," Bethany said softly. "It is," Samuel agreed. "Different from what you're used to, I imagine." "Very different, but there's something honest about it." She turned to look at him. "Thank you for showing me around today. It was my pleasure." He hesitated, then added, I was wondering if you might consider visiting the ranch tomorrow just to see it, he clarified quickly. Mrs. Wilson is welcome to accompany us, of course. Bethany considered his offer. She was curious about the ranch he had described so vividly in his letters. I would like that, she said. Though I don't think Mrs. Wilson needs to come. I trust you, Mr. Garrett. The smile that lit his face warmed her more than the autumn sun. Over the next week, Bethany fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were spent helping Mrs. Wilson with chores around the boarding house. Afternoons often in Samuel's company as he showed her more of Snowflake and the surrounding area. He took her to his ranch, a modest but well-maintained property with a sturdy two-story house, a large barn, and corrals where cattle and horses grazed. His pride in the place was evident, as he showed her the improvements he'd made over the years: the enlarged kitchen, the small orchard, the creek he had partially dammed to create a pond. It's not what you were used to in Boston, he acknowledged as they stood on the porch, looking out over the property. No, she agreed, but it has its own beauty. He turned to her, his expression earnest. Bethany, Miss Hayes, I want you to know that I understand your hesitation. Coming all this way to marry a stranger, it's a lot to ask of anyone. She nodded, appreciating his understanding. It is, but I'm beginning to feel that perhaps you're not such a stranger after all. His eyes lit up at her words, but he maintained his respectful distance. I'm glad to hear that. As they drove back to town, Bethany found herself studying his profile: the strong jaw, the straight nose, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled. He was undeniably handsome, but it was his character that increasingly drew her: his patience, his kindness, his quiet strength. That evening, as she prepared for bed, a knock came at her door. It was Mrs. Wilson, bearing a cup of tea. Thought you might like this before bed, dear, she said, placing the cup on the bedside table. Chamomile helps with sleep. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson, that's very thoughtful. The older woman lingered, straightening items on the dresser that didn't need straightening. Samuel seems quite taken with you, she finally said. Bethany felt heat rise to her cheeks. He's been very kind. It's more than kindness, I think. Mrs. Wilson sat on the edge of the bed. Forgive an old woman's curiosity, but I've known Samuel since he was a boy. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Bethany sipped her tea, unsure how to respond. Mrs. Wilson continued, her voice gentle. May I ask what's holding you back, dear? Is it Snowflake? Is it too different from what you're used to? Bethany set down her cup. It's not Snowflake. The town is lovely and everyone has been so welcoming. She hesitated. I suppose I'm afraid. Afraid of what? Of making another mistake, of trusting too quickly. Bethany hadn't intended to confide in Mrs. Wilson, but something about the woman's motherly concern loosened her tongue. My father. He trusted the wrong people. He invested our family's money in ventures that failed. When he lost everything, the man I was engaged to broke our engagement. He said he couldn't marry into a family with no social standing. Mrs. Wilson's face softened with sympathy. Oh, my dear. My father took his own life shortly after, Bethany continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The shame was too much for him. I had nowhere to go, no prospects. That's when I placed the advertisement that Samuel answered. Mrs. Wilson reached out to take Bethany's hand. I'm so sorry for what you've endured, but if I may say so, Samuel Garrett is nothing like the man who abandoned you. Samuel values honor above all else. I believe that, Bethany said. Truly, I do, but I also need to be sure of my own feelings. Marriage should be more than just a convenient arrangement, shouldn't it? Mrs. Wilson smiled. Indeed it should, and that's why I think you're doing the right thing, taking your time. She rose to leave. Just don't take too much time, dear. Good men like Samuel don't come along every day. After Mrs. Wilson left, Bethany sat by the window, watching as lamps were extinguished throughout the town. Somewhere out there, 3 miles beyond the edge of town, Samuel was on his ranch. Was he thinking of her, as she was thinking of him? The next morning brought a surprise, a letter delivered by a ranch hand. In Samuel's now familiar handwriting, it invited her to attend the harvest festival that weekend as his guest. "The whole town comes together," he had written. "There's dancing, food, and games for the children. I would be honored if you would accompany me." Bethany found herself looking forward to the event with an anticipation that surprised her. She spent the day helping Mrs. Wilson prepare pies for the festival, enjoying the older woman's stories about harvest festivals of years past. "Last year," Mrs. Wilson recounted as they rolled out dough, "Samuel won the axe-throwing contest. You should have seen how the Miller twins tried to catch his eye after that, but he barely noticed." Bethany tried not to feel pleased by this information, but she couldn't quite suppress a small smile. When Saturday arrived, Bethany dressed with particular care in one of her nicer dresses, a rose-colored gown that she had saved for special occasions. Mrs. Wilson helped her arrange her hair, weaving a ribbon through the braids she coiled at the back of her head. "Samuel won't know what hit him," the older woman said with satisfaction as she stepped back to admire her handiwork. Samuel arrived promptly at noon, dressed in what was clearly his best outfit, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. The look of appreciation in his eyes when he saw Bethany made her heart flutter in a way it hadn't done in a very long time. "Miss Hayes," he said, his voice warm, "you look beautiful." "Thank you, Mr. Garrett. You look quite handsome yourself." The town square had been transformed for the festival. Tables laden with food lined one side, while a space had been cleared for dancing. A small band was already playing, and children darted about, their laughter filling the air. As they walked together through the festival, Bethany was struck by how natural it felt to be at Samuel's side. He introduced her to those she hadn't yet met, his hand occasionally coming to rest lightly at the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. Each touch, though brief and proper, sent a warmth spreading through her. They sampled the various dishes contributed by townspeople, participated in some of the games, and watched as the children engaged in sack races and apple-bobbing contests. "Would you care to dance?" Samuel asked as the band struck up a lively tune. Bethany hesitated. She hadn't danced since before her father's disgrace, when she had been a regular at Boston's social events. "I'm a bit out of practice," she admitted. Samuel smiled. "So am I. We can be out of practice together." His hand was warm and steady as he led her to the dancing area. Other couples were already moving to the music, their faces flushed with exertion and pleasure. Samuel's arm circled her waist, maintaining a respectful distance as they began to move to the music. Despite her concerns, Bethany found that the steps came back to her easily, and Samuel proved to be a capable dancer. As they twirled among the other couples, she found herself laughing with genuine delight. "You dance very well for a rancher," she teased. He grinned, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "My mother insisted that both Stephen and I learn, said no son of hers would stumble around a dance floor like a newborn colt." The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Samuel drew her a fraction closer, still maintaining propriety but close enough that she could catch the scent of bay rum and clean linen. They moved together with surprising grace, and Bethany found herself studying his face, the way his green eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the tiny scar near his left eyebrow, the strong line of his jaw. "What happened there?" she asked, nodding toward the scar. "Fell from a horse when I was 12, he replied. First time I tried to break a wild Mustang, the horse won that round. But not the war, I imagine, he laughed. No, not the war. We came to an understanding eventually. As the afternoon wore on, Bethany found herself increasingly at ease. The people of Snowflake treated her with warmth, many expressing their pleasure that Samuel had finally found someone special. When the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Samuel suggested they take a walk away from the festivities. "It can get a bit overwhelming," he said. "Thought you might appreciate a moment of quiet." They strolled to a small church garden at the edge of the town square, where benches had been placed among late-blooming flowers. As they sat, the sounds of the festival became a pleasant backdrop to their conversation. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Samuel asked. "Very much," Bethany replied honestly. "Everyone has been so welcoming. They're good people. Hardworking, honest, like you," she said without thinking. Samuel looked at her, surprise and pleasure in his eyes. "That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's truth. You've been—" She searched for the right words. "You've been more than I could have hoped for, Samuel." It was the first time she had used his given name, and the significance wasn't lost on either of them. His eyes softened, and he reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. "Bethany," he said, his voice low, "I know this isn't what you were used to in Boston. I know it's a simpler life, a harder one in some ways. But I want you to know that if you choose to stay, if you choose me, I will do everything in my power to make sure you never regret it." She looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from years of ranch work, hers smaller and smoother. There was something right about the way they fit together. "I'd like to stay," she said softly. "Not just in Snowflake, but with you." The hope that dawned in his eyes was like the sunrise over the mountains, gradual, then all at once illuminating everything. "Are you certain? I don't want you to feel rushed." She squeezed his hand. "I'm certain. These past days, getting to know you beyond your letters, seeing how you live, how you treat others, I've seen everything I need to see." Samuel's smile was radiant. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward. Bethany closed her eyes as his lips met hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief but filled with promise, and when they parted, she knew with certainty that she had made the right choice. "When?" he asked simply. She understood what he was asking. "Soon," she replied, "but not too soon. I'd like to get to know you even better first." He nodded, respecting her wish for a proper courtship despite their unusual beginning. "How does Christmas sound? That's nearly 2 months away." "Christmas would be perfect," she agreed. As they walked back to the festival, hand in hand now, Bethany felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The fear that had kept her on that train seemed distant now, replaced by a growing certainty that Snowflake and Samuel were exactly where she was meant to be. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. With her marriage to Samuel set for Christmas Day, Bethany threw herself into preparing for her new life. Mrs. Wilson helped her order fabric for a wedding dress, and Mrs. Winters at the dress shop took her measurements, promising a gown that would make that rancher of yours speechless. Samuel courted her properly, calling at the boarding house each evening after his work at the ranch was done. They took walks through town, attended church services together, and sometimes just sat on Mrs. Wilson's porch, talking until the stars came out. Bethany learned more about his life, how he had struggled after his parents' death to keep the ranch going while raising his younger brother, how he had slowly expanded their herd and their lands, and how he had renovated the ranch house bit by bit, always with the hope that someday it would be a true home. "I've added a room that could be a library," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire in Mrs. Wilson's parlor. "I remember you writing about how much you love books." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Bethany found herself falling more deeply for this quiet man who observed so much and said so little, but whose actions spoke volumes. For his part, Samuel seemed content simply to be in her presence, though his eyes often followed her with a warmth that made her blush. He respected the boundaries she set, never pressing for more than she was ready to give, but the anticipation of their Christmas wedding hummed between them like an electrical current. As November turned to December, Bethany began to receive letters from Samuel's brother Stephen, who wrote that he was delighted by the news of their engagement and was making arrangements to return from university for the wedding. "Stephen is quite curious about you," Samuel told her as they drove back from a visit to the ranch, where Bethany had been helping make decisions about curtains and furniture arrangements. "He says anyone who can get his stubborn brother to the altar must be remarkable indeed." Bethany laughed. "And what did you tell him?" "That he was absolutely right." Samuel's gaze was tender. "You are remarkable, Bethany Hayes." The week before Christmas brought a snowfall that transformed Snowflake into a winter wonderland. The mountains gleamed white against the blue sky, and icicles hung from the eaves of buildings like crystal decorations. Samuel Garrett arrived 3 days before the wedding, a younger, slightly leaner version of his brother, with the same green eyes but a more outgoing manner. He embraced Bethany warmly upon their introduction. "So you're the woman brave enough to take on my brother and his ranch," he said with a grin. "I think you'll do splendidly." "Don't overwhelm her, Stephen," Samuel warned, but there was affection in his tone. "I'm not easily overwhelmed," Bethany assured them both, and Stephen laughed appreciatively. "I can see why you chose her, Sam. She's got spirit." The final days before the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations. Mrs. Wilson and several other women from town helped decorate the church with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Bethany's dress was finished, a creation of ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but elegant. On Christmas Eve, a small party was held at the boarding house. The women of Snowflake had organized it as a combination Christmas celebration and wedding shower, presenting Bethany with gifts for her new home: embroidered linens, a handmade quilt, cooking utensils, and a beautiful china tea set. "This is too much," Bethany protested, overwhelmed by the generosity. Mrs. Thomas, who had become a friend over the past weeks, squeezed her hand. "It's not nearly enough. You've brought happiness to one of our most respected citizens. The whole town rejoices with you." That night, unable to sleep with anticipation, Bethany stood at her window watching snow fall gently on the quiet town. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Samuel Garrett. The thought no longer filled her with anxiety but with a quiet joy. A soft knock at her door surprised her. Opening it, she found Mrs. Wilson also still awake. "I thought you might like some company," the older woman said. "Last night as a single woman can be a thoughtful time." Bethany welcomed her in and they sat together by the window. "Are you nervous, dear?" Mrs. Wilson asked. "A little," Bethany admitted, "but not about marrying Samuel, more about being a good wife to him, being what he needs." Mrs. Wilson patted her hand. "You already are what he needs. I've never seen that man so happy." She hesitated, then added with a twinkle in her eye, "As for the other aspects of marriage, well, love has a way of teaching what's needed." Bethany blushed but appreciated the older woman's tactful reassurance. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the fresh snow sparkling in the sunlight. Mrs. Wilson helped Bethany dress, arranging her hair in an elaborate style crowned with a small wreath of holly berries and evergreen. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Wilson said, tears in her eyes. "Like an angel from the top of a Christmas tree." A knock at the door announced the arrival of Judge Wilson, who had offered to escort Bethany to the church in the absence of her own father. "My dear," he said when he saw her, "Samuel Garrett is the luckiest man in the Arizona Territory today." The church was filled to capacity when they arrived, with seemingly the entire population of Snowflake in attendance. As the small organ began to play, Bethany took a deep breath and stepped into the church on Judge Wilson's arm. Samuel waited at the altar, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him in a new black suit, his hair neatly combed, his expression one of awestruck adoration as he watched her approach. Beside him stood Stephen, beaming with approval. When Judge Wilson placed her hand in Samuel's, the warmth of his touch steadied her nerves. The minister's words washed over her as she stood gazing into Samuel's eyes, seeing in them everything she had come to love about him: his strength, his kindness, his unwavering integrity. "I, Samuel, take thee, Bethany, to be my wedded wife," he said, his voice clear and certain. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." When it was her turn, Bethany's voice was soft but steady. "I, Bethany, take thee, Samuel, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." The exchange of rings, a simple gold band for her, a matching one for him, sealed their vows. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Samuel's kiss was tender but held a promise of deeper passion to come, and Bethany found herself blushing as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Garrett. The reception was held in the town hall, decorated festively for both Christmas and the wedding. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by everyone in town, and the band played cheerful tunes as people ate, drank, and celebrated. Samuel kept Bethany close throughout, his hand often finding hers, his eyes frequently seeking her out even when they were momentarily separated by well-wishers. When they danced, he held her a bit closer than he had at the Harvest Festival, now that he had the right. "Are you happy, Mrs. Garrett?" he asked softly as they moved around the floor. The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. As the afternoon wore on, Stephen approached them, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I think it's time you two made your escape," he said. "I've had the sleigh prepared." Outside, they found the ranch wagon had been transformed, decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons, with thick blankets laid over the seat for warmth. Stephen helped Bethany up, then clapped his brother on the shoulder. "Go on, take your bride home," he said. "Don't worry about me. I'm staying in town tonight with the Wilsons." The knowing looks from the guests made Bethany blush, but as Samuel climbed up beside her and took the reins, she felt only anticipation for this next step in their life together. The 3-mile journey to the ranch passed in comfortable quiet, the only sounds the jingle of the harness and the crunch of snow beneath the wagon wheels. Samuel's arm around her kept her warm against the winter chill. "Look," he said as they crested a hill. "Home." The ranch house glowed with warm light in the gathering dusk, smoke curling from the chimney, windows bright with lamps that had been lit in preparation for their arrival. It looked welcoming, peaceful, exactly what a home should be. When they arrived, Samuel helped her down from the wagon, but before she could walk to the house, he surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Samuel," she gasped, laughing. "It's tradition," he said, carrying her easily up the porch steps. A bride should be carried over the threshold of her new home. Inside, the house was warm and inviting. A fire burned in the hearth of the main room, and Bethany could see that care had been taken to prepare for her arrival. Fresh curtains hung at the windows. A vase of winter greenery sat on the table, and everything was spotlessly clean. Samuel set her down gently, but kept his arms around her. "Welcome home, Bethany Garrett." She looked up at him, this man who had waited so patiently for her letters, then for her arrival, then on that train platform, and finally for today. The journey that had begun with fear had led her to this moment of absolute certainty. "I love you, Samuel," she said softly, the words coming easily now. "Thank you for waiting for me." His eyes darkened with emotion. "I would have waited forever if needed," he said, lowering his head to kiss her, no longer the restrained kiss of courtship, but the passionate kiss of a husband claiming his bride. Later, as they lay in the warmth of their marriage bed, Bethany rested her head on Samuel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was so afraid that day on the train," she confessed. "Afraid of the unknown, afraid of making another mistake." Samuel's hand stroked her hair gently. "Fear is natural when facing something new. It was your courage in stepping off that train despite your fear that first made me realize how remarkable you are." She propped herself up to look at him. "And now, what do you think of me now?" His smile was tender as he traced her cheek with his fingertips. "I think you're everything I ever hoped for, and more than I dared dream of. And I think I'm the luckiest man in all of Arizona territory." Spring came early to Snowflake that year, bringing wildflowers to the rangeland and new calves to the herd. Bethany had settled into ranch life with surprising ease, finding joy in creating a true home with Samuel. The library he had prepared for her now held the books she had brought from Boston, supplemented by new ones ordered from catalogs or purchased during their monthly trips to town. Samuel had kept his promise to make sure she never regretted her decision. His love, expressed in both words and countless thoughtful actions, had turned the ranch into a haven of happiness. They worked side by side during the days, Bethany learning to manage the household, helping with the vegetable garden, and even, occasionally, riding out with Samuel to check on the herd. Their evenings were spent in comfortable companionship, reading aloud to each other or simply talking, followed by nights of passionate discovery. On a warm evening in May, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Samuel's arm was around her shoulders, holding her close against his side. "I've been thinking," Bethany said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. Samuel looked down at her, his expression curious. "The house might seem a bit small come winter." "Small?" "It's just the two of us and Stephen when he visits. I think," he stopped abruptly, his eyes widening as her meaning became clear. "Bethany, are you saying?" She nodded, her smile radiant. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Samuel, around Christmas time." The joy that transformed his face was everything she had hoped for. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he said, drawing back to look at her with eyes that shone with unshed tears. "You've given me everything, Bethany, your trust, your love, and now this. I didn't think it was possible to love you more than I already did, but I was wrong." As the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Bethany looked up at the man who had waited for her with such patience and love. The journey that had begun with fear on a train platform had led her to a happiness greater than she had ever imagined possible. "I thank God every day that I found the courage to step off that train," she said softly. Samuel's arms tightened around her. "And I thank God every day that you did." December brought another blanket of snow to Snowflake, transforming the landscape once again into a winter wonderland. The ranch house, now decorated for both Christmas and the imminent arrival of the baby, glowed with warmth and anticipation. Stephen had arrived from university a week earlier, eager to be present for the birth of his niece or nephew. Mrs. Wilson had also moved into the ranch temporarily, insisting that Bethany needed an experienced woman's help for the delivery and afterward. On Christmas Eve, as the house filled with the scents of pine boughs and baking, Bethany felt the first contractions. By midnight, the doctor had been summoned, and in the early hours of Christmas morning, exactly 1 year after their wedding, Catherine Rose Garrett made her entrance into the world, her lusty cries announcing her arrival. Samuel, who had paced anxiously throughout the night, was called in to meet his daughter. The sight of his strong husband cradling their tiny daughter with such gentleness brought tears to Bethany's eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered, awe in his voice, "just like her mother." As he placed the baby in Bethany's arms, then sat beside them on the bed, his arm protectively around both his wife and daughter, Bethany felt a completeness she had never known before. "Happy anniversary, Samuel," she said softly. He kissed her temple. "A year ago, you made me the happiest man alive by becoming my wife. Today, you've done it again by making me a father." Looking down at their daughter, whose tiny hand was wrapped around her father's finger, Bethany thought of all the twists and turns that had led her to this moment. The loss of her family's fortune, her father's death, the desperate decision to become a mail-order bride, all paths that had seemed dark at the time but had ultimately led her to this place of profound joy. "I was so afraid that day," she mused. Sitting on the train, too terrified to step onto the platform. Samuel's eyes, filled with love for her and their newborn daughter, met hers. "And I'm so grateful that you found the courage to overcome that fear." "It wasn't just courage," she said, understanding now what had given her the strength to take that first step. "It was hope. Something in your eyes that day, the patience and kindness I saw there, it gave me hope that there might be happiness waiting for me if I was brave enough to reach for it." Outside the window, snow fell softly on the peaceful ranch. Inside, surrounded by love, Bethany Garrett held her future in her arms and knew that the journey that had begun in fear had led her exactly where she was meant to be.